A movie theater. A father checking on his daughter. A retired cop who said he felt threatened. One bag of popcorn and one bullet that changed everything. What happened in the dark that day, and why did the law side with the shooter? Stay with us, this story will shake what you believe about justice. The air inside the Cypress Creek cinema hummed thick and buttery, heavy with the scent of overpriced popcorn and artificial flavoring. Faintly sticky floors grabbed at shuffling feet as patrons found their seats, a low murmur of conversation filling the space before the lights dimmed further. It was just another matinee afternoon, an escape into the manufactured reality of Hollywood. Outside, the Florida sun beat down; inside, the cool darkness promised relaxation, entertainment. An ordinary day. Nothing suggested the profound, irreversible violence poised to rip through the manufactured peace, about to shatter the calm. In moments, this refuge would become a crime scene, the mundane backdrop for a brutal, split-second decision. How does it happen? How does the trivial annoyance, the glow of a phone screen in the dark, a whispered exchange, ignite a firestorm? Where does irritation end and perceived threat begin? In that charged moment, when does the instinct for self-preservation twist into something else, something fatal? Is it truly self-defense when the catalyst is so mundane, or is it impulsive crime, a flash of rage fueled by pride or perhaps fear? A single shot, a moment of incomprehension, sends ripples outwards, shattering families and challenging a community's sense of safety. These questions would soon hang heavy in the air, long after the echo of the gunshot faded. A life would end. Another life would be irrevocably altered. And a controversial law, Florida's Stand Your Ground, designed to empower self-defense, would be thrust into the spotlight, its application and interpretation debated with fierce intensity across the state and nation. Rows apart, settling into the plush, worn seats, sat the two men at the heart of the impending storm. Adam Olsen, a man defined by his connections to family, perhaps glancing at his phone one last time before the main feature. Further back, Cole Rivers, a man whose life had been shaped by decades of authority and order, perhaps finding the disregard for cinema etiquette grating. Two lives, vastly different in age and experience, occupying the same fragile bubble of cinematic darkness, unknowingly on a collision course. They were strangers, yet their fates were about to become tragically intertwined by a fleeting argument, a bag of popcorn, and a .380 caliber pistol. This story delves deeper than the headlines of a cinema shooting. It explores the anatomy of that moment, the pressures and pasts that brought Adam Olsen and Cole Rivers to that confrontation. It examines the ensuing legal battle, the complex arguments over fear, responsibility, and the very definition of self-defense under the Stand Your Ground doctrine. But beyond the legal debates and the tragic outcome, it's a human story. Before the arguments and the legal battles, there were just people. To understand the tragedy, we must first understand the man whose life was extinguished in that darkened room. That man was Adam Olsen. 43 years old, with roots stretching back to the small town of Meadowbrook, Illinois, a place where life unfolded at a gentler pace. But Adam's path hadn't stayed small-town simple. Like many young men seeking direction or perhaps adventure, he answered the call of duty, joining the United States Navy. His service wasn't just a footnote, it included deployment during Operation Desert Storm in 1991. The searing heat, the tension, the lightning-fast coalition victory over Saddam Hussein's forces in Kuwait, these experiences forge a person. It was a world away from the predictable rhythms of Meadowbrook, a crash course in discipline and danger that inevitably reshaped his perspective on life's fragility and perhaps fueled his later appreciation for simple stability. They leave marks, some visible, some hidden deep within. It was, as the transcript hinted, profoundly transformative. What exactly that meant for Adam, day to day, remained largely beneath the surface of his easygoing demeanor. When his military service concluded, Adam traded the disciplined structure of the Navy for the sun-drenched shores of Florida, settling in Palm Harbor. Here, he built a new life, shedding the uniform but perhaps retaining some of the focus it instilled. He wasn't defined solely by his past as a Navy veteran, he became an accomplished civilian, finding fulfillment in the fast-paced world of velocity motorsports. As chief financial officer, he wasn't just some disconnected numbers guy crunching spreadsheets in a back office. No, Adam thrived on connection, known for his open door and willingness to actually talk to people, not just email them. Colleagues spoke of his ability to build strong bonds, to find genuine satisfaction in the work in the people around him, an energy that was apparently infectious. He seemed to overflow with enthusiasm, a zest for life that permeated everything he undertook. Yet, for all his professional success and varied interests, the thrill of off-road motorcycle racing, the calm of boating on the Gulf waters, strumming a guitar, the true core of Adam Olsen's world resided within the walls of his home. He was a devoted husband to Sarah, his partner in building their Florida life. But the absolute, undeniable center of his universe? His young daughter, Alexis. His love for her wasn't just stated, it radiated from him. Friends knew that no matter the topic of conversation, work, sports, the weather, Adam would inevitably, skillfully, steer it back to his little girl. His pride was palpable when he spoke of her latest milestones, her funny quirks, her simple joys. A glance at his social media was like flipping through a scrapbook dedicated solely to her, sun-drenched afternoons at the beach, silly Halloween costumes, triumphant photos of Alexis perched atop a pony at a local fair. These weren't just pictures, they were testaments to where his heart truly lay. That little girl was his sunshine, the uncomplicated joy that anchored his world. Fatherhood wasn't just a role he played, it was the identity that defined him most profoundly. People were drawn to Adam Olsen. He possessed that rare combination of easy laughter and genuine listening skills. He was the friend you turned to for solid advice, the colleague who inspired you to be a little better, the kind of person whose presence simply made things brighter. Generous, kind, grounded, he represented the best kind of ordinary man, building a life rich in relationships and simple pleasures. A life humming with promise. On January 13, 2014, that life included plans for a simple escape, an afternoon movie with Sarah. Just a regular Monday matinee, a chance to relax and unwind, stepping out of the routine into the manufactured darkness of the cinema, utterly unaware of the other figure whose path was converging with his own, carrying his own history and burdens toward the very same destination. That other figure, carrying his own distinct history and burdens toward the very same destination, was Cole Rivers. 71 years old, a retired police captain, a man whose identity had been forged over decades spent upholding the law, enforcing order, and commanding respect. His career wasn't just a job, it was nearly 17 years spent leading units, making decisions that carried weight, navigating the often harsh realities of crime and consequence. Such a long tenure in law enforcement shapes a person, instilling a deep familiarity with rules, procedures, and the expectation of compliance. Cole Rivers had earned the trust of colleagues and the standing of a respected community figure. He had moved through the world accustomed to a certain degree of authority, a certain deference. Retirement had likely softened the edges, at least outwardly. To his neighbors, Cole was often seen as warm, quick with a smile, always helpful. He was a long-married family man, wed to his wife Martha since 1967, a father to their daughter Jessica, and presumably a grandfather enjoying the slower pace of his golden years. Diligent in Bible studies, he presented the image of steadfast conventionality, a pillar of the local community enjoying a well-earned rest. On the surface, he was the picture of respectable retirement, a man seemingly at peace. But beneath the surface of any individual lies complexity. Could decades spent in a hierarchical, often confrontational profession have instilled a certain rigidity? An intolerance for perceived disorder or disrespect, however minor? Perhaps retirement, while welcome, also left a void where the clear structure and authority of his former life once resided. At 71, Cole was also facing the undeniable realities of aging. Later trial testimonies would speak of declining physical strength, of respiratory issues, the creeping vulnerabilities that chip away at a man who once embodied strength and command. Did this create an internal friction, a frustration with limitations, a heightened sensitivity to situations where he felt his diminished capacity acutely? Could a perceived challenge, even a trivial one, feel disproportionately threatening to a man grappling with these changes? Hints of a shorter fuse, a specific intolerance for disruptions in certain settings, had surfaced before. Just weeks prior to the fateful matinee, another incident occurred in a different movie theater. Cole had reportedly confronted and threatened a woman for texting during the previews. Was this just an isolated grumpy outburst, easily dismissed? Or was it a flicker of something more concerning, a sign of a growing impatience, a specific trigger related to the rules and etiquette of public spaces, particularly the darkened sanctuary of a cinema? It raises uncomfortable questions about a potential pattern, a simmering temper beneath the affable exterior, especially when faced with perceived defiance. Understanding Cole Rivers isn't about excusing the actions that would soon follow. It's about attempting to sketch the man who arrived at the Cypress Creek Cinema that January afternoon. A man with a decorated past, a respected present, but also a man navigating the complex terrain of aging, perhaps struggling with a loss of authority, and potentially carrying his sensitivity to disrespect that could flare into anger. He wasn't inherently monstrous. He was a man with a history, contradictions, and perhaps vulnerabilities he struggled to manage. He settled into his seat beside Martha, the darkness enveloping them, the previews beginning to roll. It was just another couple seeking an escape at the movies, ready to watch the war film Lone Survivor. But for Cole, the rules of public conduct, the expectation of quiet respect in that shared space, perhaps, weighed more heavily, ticking like a clock towards an unforeseen detonation. The detonation came not with a literal explosion, but with the friction of two worlds colliding in the manufactured gloom of Row G at the Cypress Creek Cinema. The previews for the military action film Lone Survivor blasted from the screen, a cacophony of simulated gunfire and explosions ironically underscoring the real-life violence about to erupt. On screen flashed the standard, polite request: silence your cell phones, refrain from talking or texting. A rule. An expectation of communal respect that Cole Rivers, seated beside his wife Martha, likely noted with tacit approval. A rule he expected others to follow. Just ahead, Adam Olsen, perhaps his mind briefly drifting from the on-screen action to his young daughter Alexis at home, slipped his phone from his pocket. The screen flared to life, a small, pale rectangle cutting through the shared darkness. An innocent act, driven by a father's simple need for reassurance, a quick check, maybe a short text to the babysitter confirming all was well. But the light, however discreet, was an intrusion. And it didn't escape the notice of the retired police captain seated directly behind him. Cole Rivers leaned forward, his voice a low, sharp hiss that sliced through the ambient noise. "Turn that off. Now." The demand was abrupt, carrying the weight of assumed authority. Adam, likely startled, turned slightly. Trying to keep his voice low, respectful despite the interruption, he offered a simple explanation. "Sorry, just texting my daughter's babysitter. Making sure she's okay." He thought that would be the end of it. A reasonable explanation for a minor breach of etiquette during the previews, not even the main feature. But reason wasn't registering with Cole Rivers. His irritation, already simmering perhaps from the earlier seat-kicking observed by witness Charles Miller a few rows back, seemed to flash into anger. Miller, a former Marine himself, noted the older man's aggressive posture, the palpable agitation. Another witness, Air Force veteran Mark Thompson, would recall the distinct lack of aggression in Adam's voice, contrasting sharply with the older man's simmering fury. Despite Adam's calm reply, Cole remained visibly incensed. Rather than letting the minor incident pass, he abruptly stood, brushing past his wife Martha, and stalked out of the auditorium, presumably to find a manager. The air thickened with unspoken tension. Sarah Olsen placed a hand lightly on her husband Adam's arm, a silent question in her eyes. Why the overreaction? When Cole returned moments later, he was alone. No manager accompanied him. Whatever exchange occurred outside, it hadn't diffused the situation. If anything, his solitary return seemed to amplify the tension. He retook his seat, the silence stretching, taut as a wire. The argument, however, wasn't over. It reignited, the voices perhaps a fraction louder now, drawing nervous glances from nearby patrons. Adam, still trying to bridge the gap, leaned back slightly. "Look, does it really bother you that much?" Mark Thompson remembered hearing him ask, his tone still measured. "I just got a voicemail from my daughter's babysitter." Do you mind if I just check on her? A simple request. Courteous. Understandable for any parent. Seconds was all it would take. But the atmosphere had shifted irrevocably. Hostility crackled between the rows. Maybe pride was pricked, maybe wires crossed in the darkness, maybe Cole's earlier confrontation with the texting woman had primed him for this. The point of no return was reached, hurtling towards them both. Then, in a gesture born perhaps of frustration, perhaps defiance, perhaps simply wanting the ridiculous confrontation to end, Adam Olsen stood, turned partially towards the man behind him, and tossed his bag of popcorn. Not thrown at him with force, but more of an underhand lob, a gesture of exasperation. Kernels likely scattered, unnoticed in the dark. It was just popcorn. The movie itself still hadn't begun. What Cole Rivers claimed to see, or perceive, in that instant remains locked behind his own eyes. A dark object? A threat? Or simply the final insult he wouldn't tolerate? What happened next was brutally fast, utterly decisive. Without apparent hesitation, Cole reached down, his hand finding the .380 caliber pistol concealed in his pants. As Adam stood there, perhaps beginning to turn back around, Sarah instinctively reached out, her hand landing on her husband's chest, a futile, desperate attempt to de-escalate, to shield. But it was too late. Cole raised the weapon. The sharp, percussive crack of the gunshot ripped through the theater, momentarily louder than the movie previews. Chaos erupted. Adam Olsen staggered backward, a look of utter disbelief washing over his face as he collapsed against a spectator behind him. "I can't believe he shot me," he managed to gasp, his voice trembling not just with pain but with sheer incomprehension. The bullet had torn through his chest, tragically passing through Sarah's hand as well in its devastating trajectory. Screams echoed in the darkness. People scrambled, ducking behind seats. Amidst the panic, training kicked in. A nurse present in the audience rushed to Adam's side, attempting first aid, trying desperately to preserve the fading spark of life. Nearby, an off-duty sheriff's deputy reacted instantly, moving swiftly towards Cole Rivers, disarming him, securing the weapon. Cole offered no resistance. He simply sat there, frozen, the .380 now safely out of his grasp, his face reportedly blank, stunned, as if he himself couldn't process the irreversible act he had just committed. Someone fumbled for a phone, the screen illuminating their own shocked face as they dialed 911. Flashing blue and red lights would soon paint the exterior walls of the Cypress Creek Cinema, sirens cutting through the Florida afternoon. The immediate horror was over, but the long, complex aftermath, the investigation, the charges, the agonizing search for answers in a seemingly senseless act, was just beginning. The flashing lights outside the Cypress Creek Cinema signaled not just an end to the immediate violence, but the beginning of a legal odyssey that would stretch nearly a decade, winding its way through the complexities of Florida law. As Adam Olsen fought for his life in a nearby hospital, a battle he would tragically lose just hours later, never having seen the film he came for, Cole Rivers, the 71-year-old retired police captain, sat stunned and disarmed amidst the chaos he had wrought. The initial shock gave way to the cold reality of the justice system. Rivers was soon charged with second-degree murder for the death of Adam Olsen and aggravated assault for the bullet wound sustained by Sarah Olsen's hand. The stage was set for a protracted legal battle that would captivate and divide public opinion. From the outset, Cole Rivers' defense, spearheaded by attorney Richard Estevez, centered on a single, powerful, and deeply controversial pillar: self-defense under Florida's Stand Your Ground law. This statute, unlike laws in many other places, removes the duty to retreat before using force, including deadly force, if a person reasonably believes it necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm to themselves or another. The key word, particularly debated in Florida's interpretation, is reasonable. What constitutes a reasonable fear, especially in the heat of a confrontation? Estevez's task was to convince a jury that Cole Rivers, and that split second after popcorn was thrown, genuinely and reasonably feared for his life. The defense constructed its narrative piece by piece. They painted a picture of Cole Rivers not as an aggressor, but as a victim of circumstance and his own aging body. Central to their argument was the stark contrast in age and physicality. Rivers, 71, suffering from respiratory problems and the general frailties of his seventh decade, facing Adam Olsen, 43, significantly younger, larger, and perceived as imposing in the dimly lit theater. Estevez argued that this disparity alone created a sense of vulnerability in the older man. Furthermore, the defense claimed Rivers wasn't merely hit by lightweight popcorn kernels. They suggested another object, perhaps Olsen's cell phone, perhaps an unseen blow, struck Rivers near his eye, disorienting him, even knocking his glasses askew. In the confusing darkness, they argued, how could Rivers definitively know what was coming next? Could a cell phone, wielded as a projectile, not be perceived as a potential weapon capable of inflicting serious harm? The defense leaned heavily on the subjective nature of fear allowed under stand your ground. It wasn't about whether Adam Olsen intended serious harm, but whether Cole Rivers reasonably believed he did. The prosecution offered a starkly different interpretation of events. They presented evidence, including testimony from first responders and medical examiners, indicating Cole Rivers sustained no significant injuries. A slight redness near his eye, yes, but no bruising, no cuts, nothing consistent with being struck forcefully by a phone or a fist. They highlighted the witness accounts of Charles Miller and Mark Thompson, both military veterans themselves, who described Rivers as agitated and aggressive before the popcorn incident, while Olsen remained relatively calm and explanatory. Critically, no witness reported seeing Olsen attempt to throw his phone or make any move suggesting an imminent physical attack beyond the tossing of popcorn. The prosecution hammered home the apparent absurdity of the situation. Was a retired police captain, trained in de-escalation, truly justified in using deadly force over a texting dispute and a handful of popcorn? They portrayed the shooting not as self-defense, but as a tragic, disproportionate overreaction fueled by anger and perhaps wounded pride. Adding another layer of complexity was the legal maneuvering surrounding the stand your ground law itself. Before the main trial even began, there were hearings to determine if Rivers qualified for immunity under the statute, essentially asking a judge to rule pretrial that the shooting was justified self-defense, thereby dismissing the charges. The initial judge denied this immunity, finding insufficient evidence to support the self-defense claim at that stage. However, this decision was later overturned by an appellate court, which ruled that the complexities and conflicting accounts meant the question of stand your ground justification was ultimately a matter for a jury to decide during the full trial. This back and forth highlighted the contentious nature of the law and its application. The trial itself, finally commencing in February 2022, a staggering 8 years after the shooting, brought forth key moments that shaped the narrative. The prosecution called a woman who testified that, just weeks before the fatal encounter with Adam Olsen, Cole Rivers had confronted and threatened her in another movie theater over her own cell phone use, suggesting a potential pattern of behavior. Witness Charles Miller delivered a poignant, resonant question from the stand, echoing the thoughts of many. Why does he bring a gun to the movies? It's a happy place. The defense, meanwhile, attempted to shift focus, suggesting Adam Olsen might have been browsing Facebook, not just texting his babysitter, a detail the prosecution argued was irrelevant to the justification for deadly force. The core conflict remained stubbornly clear. Was Cole Rivers' fear, however subjectively felt, reasonable under the circumstances and the law? Or was this a case of impulsive violence, an elderly man's flash of temper escalating tragically out of control? The 8-year delay only added to the anguish, drawing out the uncertainty for everyone involved, especially the Olsen family waiting for answers and accountability. The legal argument spun a complex web, but ultimately, the jury needed to understand the man behind the gun. Could the testimony of those closest to him illuminate his state of mind in those fateful seconds? To paint that picture of perceived vulnerability, the defense called upon those who knew Cole Rivers best, shifting the courtroom focus from the cold letter of the law to the intimate, often painful, realities of aging and fear. The strategy was clear: humanize the defendant. Move the jury's focus away from the image of the experienced, capable former police captain and towards that of a weakened, elderly man who felt he had no other recourse against a perceived threat than the .380 pistol nestled in his pants. It was a plea for empathy, an attempt to frame the tragic event through the lens of frailty. His adult children took the stand, their testimony painting a portrait of a father diminished by time. They spoke of the man he once was: strong, dynamic, someone who lifted heavy weights, enjoyed kayaking, actively engaged with his children and grandchildren. But, they testified, the year leading up to the shooting had seen a marked decline. His daughter, Jessica Rivers, recounted moments through tears, moments that underscored this shift. She described the surprising difficulty her father, once the embodiment of paternal strength, had in simply lifting his small grandchild. She spoke of him, a man who once effortlessly wielded a kayak paddle, now needing assistance just to take it apart. It was hard to watch, Jessica confided, her voice thick with emotion, describing the painful visibility of her father struggling with tasks that were once second nature. The defense attorney, Richard Estevez, seized upon this testimony. See? This wasn't a powerful officer of the law facing a minor annoyance. This was an elderly man, acutely aware of his own fading strength, confronting someone significantly younger and physically imposing in the intimidating darkness of a confined space. The simple act of Adam Olsen standing and turning towards him, Estevez argued, could reasonably be perceived as an imminent, overwhelming threat by this specific man. Then came Martha Rivers, Cole's wife of decades, the woman sitting beside him when the fatal shot was fired. Her account added another layer of complexity and raw emotion. She recalled the initial tension, claiming Adam Olsen had become irritated and insulted her husband over the phone use. She testified that she'd even suggested they move seats to avoid further conflict, a suggestion Cole either didn't hear or chose to ignore in the heat of the moment. She described Cole getting up to find the manager and the situation rapidly deteriorating upon his return. Martha depicted the critical moments through her own fearful eyes, Adam Olsen suddenly standing, turning towards Cole, leaning forward slightly. She interpreted it as preparation for a physical confrontation. I had never been so scared in my life, she confessed, her voice shaky, describing the terror she felt for her husband. It was then, she said, feeling cornered, that Cole drew his weapon and fired. But Martha's testimony also contained a detail that resonated with chilling ambiguity. Under questioning, she clarified a crucial point: she did not see Adam Olsen throw anything, not popcorn, not a phone, nothing, at her husband before the shot rang out. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she added the haunting coda, "I wish it had been." The words hung heavy in the courtroom. Did they undercut the defense's implication that Cole was reacting to being struck? Or did they paradoxically reinforce the narrative of overwhelming fear, suggesting the situation felt so threatening that even without a projectile, the perceived advance was enough? It left the jury grappling with the precise sequence and, more importantly, Cole's state of mind. Finally, after 8 long years, Cole Rivers himself took the stand to offer his own account. He began by explaining that, initially, the annoyance over the phone light hadn't translated into a feeling of physical threat. He saw Adam Olsen merely as an insolent, disrespectful fellow patron ignoring the rules. But, according to Rivers, everything changed upon his return after seeking out the manager. He claimed Adam Olsen was no longer just irritated, he had become completely uncontrollable, his demeanor shifting into what Rivers perceived as explosive rage. Then, he described the critical moments from his perspective. He felt a sudden shock above his left eye. He wasn't sure if it was a punch or Olsen's phone, but the impact, he claimed, disoriented him, knocking his glasses off, blurring his vision. As he tried to regain his senses, he saw Adam Olsen abruptly stand, turn, and advance towards him. I was sitting there, totally vulnerable, Rivers testified, his voice reportedly breaking, and he was rising over me. He looked like a monster. I had nowhere to go, no way to defend myself. He vehemently denied shooting Olsen because of the popcorn. In fact, he claimed to have no memory of anything being thrown before he felt struck and saw Olsen advancing. What drove him to draw his gun, his defense argued through his testimony, was the belief that Chad Olsen was going to hit him, seriously injure him, and possibly even kill him. He insisted, "I shot Mr. Olsen because I thought he was going to attack me. I didn't want to shoot anyone." He concluded his testimony by expressing deep regret, acknowledging the immense pain caused to the Olsen family and the irreversible nature of his actions. The defense had laid out its narrative, a story not of malice, but of fear magnified by age and vulnerability, culminating in a tragic, but legally justifiable, act of self-preservation under Florida's Stand Your Ground law. The stories had been told, the tears shed, the arguments made. Now, 12 strangers held the weight of Cole Rivers' future and the final interpretation of that fatal moment in the darkness in their hands. After days grappling with the conflicting narratives, the raw emotion, and the specific language of Florida's controversial self-defense law, those 12 strangers returned to the courtroom. The air crackled with anticipation. A hush fell, thick and heavy, as the jury foreperson handed the verdict forms to the bailiff. Then came the words that would echo far beyond the courtroom walls: "Not guilty." Cole Rivers, the 71-year-old retired police captain, was acquitted of second-degree murder in the death of Adam Olsen. Not guilty, too, of aggravated assault against Sarah Olsen, who was injured by the same bullet that killed her husband. The verdict landed like a physical blow in the divided room. On one side, quiet tears of relief, perhaps murmured thanks, the visible release of years of tension for the Rivers family and their supporters. On the other, stunned silence quickly followed by audible gasps, choked sobs, and expressions of disbelief and raw anguish from the Olsen family and those who believed Adam's death demanded accountability. The acquittal didn't bring resolution, it solidified the chasm that had opened 8 years earlier in that darkened movie theater. For Cole Rivers, the verdict meant legal freedom. He would walk out of the courthouse, cleared by the justice system. But the acquittal could not erase the events of January 13, 2014. Could it truly lift the weight of having taken another man's life over tossed popcorn and a texting argument? That day would forever remain a defining, inescapable shadow, a burden carried differently, perhaps, but carried nonetheless. For the Olsen family, the verdict offered no such solace. Their grief remained immense, now compounded by a legal outcome that felt like a profound injustice, a denial of their loss. Justice had spoken its final word, but no legal pronouncement could bring Adam back, could fill the void left in their lives, or could quiet their enduring pain. They were left only with the knowledge that, according to the 12 men and women of the jury, Cole Rivers was not legally responsible for Adam's death. Inevitably, the verdict reverberated through the wider community and reignited the fierce debate surrounding Florida's Stand Your Ground law. Was this outcome a validation of the right to self-defense, an affirmation that subjective fear, particularly for the elderly or vulnerable, justifies lethal force even without a clear physical assault? Or was it a chilling demonstration of the law's potential pitfalls, a shield for disproportionate reactions and tragic escalations born from anger or pride rather than genuine peril? The case became another complex data point in the ongoing national conversation about where the line should be drawn. How thin is that line between reasonable fear and impulsive overreaction? How much weight should age, frailty, or past experience carry in that split-second calculus? And perhaps most disturbingly, how could a conflict rooted in something so utterly trivial, a mundane annoyance in a movie theater, spiral so rapidly, so irrevocably, into lethal violence? The absurdity of the inciting incident remained stark, a sobering testament to the fragility of civility and the catastrophic potential when tempers flare, especially when firearms are readily accessible. This tragedy, born from almost nothing, serves as a haunting reminder of the complex, often volatile nature of human interaction. The legal system delivered its verdict based on the evidence presented and its interpretation of the law. But the questions linger, unsettling and profound, echoing in the shadow left by that fatal encounter in the dark.